Well, well, well. They didn't send a bully this time. They didn't send brute force or loud intimidation. They didn't send someone who relied on presence alone. They sent a thinker, a strategist, someone trained to dismantle people quietly, someone whose weapon wasn't volume, but precision, someone who knew how to enter a conversation and leave you doubting your own thoughts, someone who studied patterns, behaviors, micro-reactions, someone whose job was to get inside your head, rearrange the furniture, and leave you living in a room that no longer felt like yours. They called him a mind breaker, and they were confident, not hopeful, confident, because he had ended others before you, not publicly, internally. Careers stalled, voices softened, certainty eroded. People who once spoke clearly began second-guessing every sentence. That was his signature. He didn't destroy reputations. He rewired perception, and they thought you'd be no different. He arrived calm, polished, courteous in a way that felt measured, nothing wasted. Every word chosen like a chess move, made 3 turns in advance. He didn't threaten you. He didn't challenge you directly. He observed, listened, catalogued. He let others speak first while he mapped their weaknesses. He asked questions that seemed harmless but forced people to expose assumptions. He smiled when they over-explained. He nodded when they contradicted themselves. He never interrupted. He waited. He always waited. That patience had unmade people before, because waiting implies confidence, and confidence, when paired with intelligence, unsettles rooms. You noticed it immediately, not because you were intimidated, but because you recognized the pattern, the way his eyes tracked reactions instead of faces, the way he mirrored posture just long enough to build rapport, then subtly shifted to see who followed. The way his compliments were angled, never direct, always designed to create dependency. You'd seen this kind before. Not him specifically, but the function he served. A specialist trained to destabilize without leaving fingerprints. A person who wins by making others lose themselves. They expected you to engage, to defend, to clarify, to prove. That's how his work usually began. He'd pull you into a discussion, then tighten it slowly, until you were arguing against positions you never held, explaining things you never questioned, justifying instincts that never needed justification. By the time people realized what happened, they were already compromised. But you didn't engage the way he expected. You didn't rush to answer. You didn't rush to correct him. When he asked questions designed to narrow you into a corner, you didn't step forward or back. You stayed where you were, present, grounded, unmoved. You answered simply, not vaguely, simply. No excess explanation, no defensive framing, no attempt to impress. You didn't chase his approval or resist his influence. You treated him like weather passing through a room, a factor, not a threat. And that unsettled him more than open resistance ever could. He tried a different angle, introduced complexity, used language meant to overwhelm, referenced frameworks and theories meant to establish intellectual hierarchy. He spoke quickly now, stacking concepts, watching for confusion. This usually worked. People tried to keep up. Their eyes would dart, their breathing would change, their confidence would leak out through their posture. But you didn't speed up or slow down. You didn't ask him to repeat himself. You didn't pretend to follow if you didn't need to. You listened, then responded to the core, not the performance around it. One sentence, clean, accurate, enough. It landed like a reset, not because it was clever, but because it was aligned. And alignment is disarming to people who rely on distortion. For the first time, he felt resistance without opposition. There was nothing to push against, no emotional hook, no reactive energy. He couldn't locate your insecurity because you weren't broadcasting one. He couldn't provoke you into overextension. He couldn't bait you into defending an identity. You weren't trying to win the exchange. You weren't trying to dominate the room. You weren't trying to be seen as intelligent. You were just there, fully. And that began to disturb him, because his entire method depended on leverage, and leverage requires imbalance. You gave him none. So he escalated internally. He started running simulations, replaying your responses later, looking for gaps, for tells, for delayed reactions. He told himself you were masking, that everyone masks, that your calm was an act, that your simplicity was a strategy, that you were hiding something he hadn't uncovered yet. That belief kept him comfortable. If you were playing a game, then the rules still applied. He just hadn't found your weakness yet. He became more attentive, watched how you treated others, expected inconsistency, expected a slip. But you were the same with everyone. No shifts, no posturing, no change in tone when status entered the room. You didn't reward dominance or punish insecurity. You responded to what was actually there. And that consistency made his usual tools useless, because they relied on people changing when pressure was applied. He tried to outthink you. Set traps disguised as philosophical questions, moral dilemmas designed to force you into contradiction. You didn't dodge them. You didn't overanalyze them. You answered from experience, not abstraction. That frustrated him. Experience doesn't debate well on paper, but it holds up in real time. Every attempt to corner you collapsed because you weren't arguing positions. You were describing reality as you saw it. And reality doesn't need defending. It just needs articulation. The more he pushed, the clearer you became. The clearer you became, the more unstable he felt. Because clarity isn't something you can dismantle with cleverness. You can only attack it by undermining the person holding it. And you weren't attached to being right. That was the fracture point. He realized you weren't operating from ego. Not low ego, not hidden ego. No ego at all in the way he understood it. You weren't invested in how you were perceived. You weren't tracking reactions. You weren't collecting points. You weren't building an image. He couldn't threaten your identity because you weren't guarding one. And that made him uneasy, because his entire profession revolved around identity pressure. Strip it away, and his role becomes irrelevant. He began to feel exposed, not because you were attacking him, but because his presence suddenly felt unnecessary. You didn't need to be impressed. You didn't need to be led. You didn't need to be corrected. You were already oriented. At night, his thoughts turned on him. The same analysis he used on others now looped inward. Why didn't you react? Why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you try to prove anything? He replayed moments, looking for manipulation on your part, and found none. No hooks, no angles, just presence. And that confused him, because presence isn't something you can dissect. It doesn't have components. It doesn't have layers. It's either there or it isn't. He realized he'd spent his life inside strategies, inside methods, inside mental constructs designed to keep him ahead of others. And suddenly those constructs felt heavy, constricting. He noticed how often he was calculating instead of listening, how rarely he was actually there, how exhausting it was to maintain control in every interaction. You weren't doing any of that, and yet you weren't losing. He tried one last tactic, direct engagement, a private conversation, no audience, no social layer. He asked you plainly what you thought of his approach. The question was loaded, designed to pull critique, to invite challenge, to establish ground for dominance. You looked at him and answered honestly. You said you thought he was intelligent. You said you thought he was sharp. You said you thought he was tired, not physically, internally. You said it without judgment, without accusation, just observation. That landed harder than anything else because it wasn't strategic. It wasn't framed to weaken him. It was simply true. And truth, when offered without intent, bypasses defenses completely. He didn't respond right away. For the first time, he couldn't. His mind searched for counterplay and found none. There was no insult to deflect, no argument to dismantle, no position to reverse. You weren't challenging his competence. You were acknowledging his cost, and no one had done that before. They either feared him or admired him. Both fed the role. You saw past it, not because you were trying to expose him, but because you weren't distracted by the performance. You were responding to the human underneath. And that unsettled him deeply, because it suggested a possibility he hadn't considered, that all his intelligence, all his control, all his success might be compensating for something unresolved. He walked away that day with a disturbance he couldn't shake. Not anger, not resentment. A quiet unraveling. His thoughts began turning inward in ways he couldn't manage. The tools he used on others didn't work on himself. He could spot cognitive traps everywhere, except the one he was living in. He began questioning his methods, not their effectiveness, but their purpose. What was he actually doing to people? What was he gaining from it? Why did winning conversations feel empty the moment they ended? Why did your calm presence feel heavier than his most elaborate strategies? He started noticing how people around him adjusted when he entered a room. How they tensed, how they performed, how they weren't themselves. And for the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to be in a room where no one had to brace. You, meanwhile, continued as you always had. You didn't check to see if he was affected. You didn't follow up. You didn't change your behavior. You didn't capitalize on the shift. You weren't trying to transform him. That was the most destabilizing part. You weren't recruiting. You weren't persuading. You weren't leading him anywhere. You simply existed the same way you always had. And that constancy forced him to confront himself without distraction, without an opponent to project onto, without a narrative to hide behind. He started realizing that his intelligence had become a shield, a way to stay above feeling, a way to avoid vulnerability, a way to maintain distance while appearing engaged. And that recognition hurt, because it meant the thing he was most proud of was also the thing keeping him disconnected. He tried to rationalize it, told himself you were an outlier, that your way wasn't scalable, that presence without strategy only works in limited contexts. But the rationalizations felt thin. He couldn't unsee what he'd seen. You weren't special because you were superior. You were grounded because you were integrated. And integration can't be outmaneuvered. It doesn't compete. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't fragment under pressure. It absorbs and remains intact. That realization followed him everywhere. Into conversations, into meetings, into moments where he would normally assert control. He found himself pausing, listening longer, speaking less. Not because he was trying to change, but because the old reflexes felt wrong, heavy, out of alignment. They noticed. The people who sent him, the ones who relied on his precision, they sensed hesitation, a delay where there used to be certainty. They assumed fatigue, told him to refocus, to sharpen his edge, to reassert dominance. He nodded, said the right things, but internally, something had shifted. The edge felt blunt now, not ineffective, unnecessary. He had seen a way of being that didn't require constant vigilance, and once you see that, the old way starts to feel like a cage. He wasn't questioning his skill. He was questioning the cost, and that question, once asked, doesn't go away. It expands, it presses, it demands answers. He began watching you more closely, not to dissect, but to understand. How you moved through pressure without tightening, how you spoke without posturing, how you held boundaries without aggression, how you remained open without being invaded. None of it fit his models, and that terrified him. Because models are what kept him safe. Models allowed him to predict, to control, to stay ahead. You were unpredictable not because you were chaotic, but because you weren't operating from fear. And fear is what most predictions are built on. He started to realize that all his intelligence had been spent learning how to manage fear, not transcend it. And you weren't managing it at all. You were beyond it, not fearless, just unruled. By the time he understood what was happening, it was too late to reverse. The process had begun. Not an external collapse, but an internal reconfiguration. The questions were multiplying. The certainty was thinning. And the person they sent to dismantle you was now dismantling his own assumptions, piece by piece, whether he wanted to or not. He thought he was there to reset you. He didn't realize he was standing in the presence of something that would reset him. And as that realization started to settle, as the first layers of his identity loosened their grip, he felt the ground shift beneath him in a way that would carry him forward into a confrontation with himself he could no longer postpone. And that confrontation didn't arrive dramatically. There was no single moment where everything shattered at once, no public breakdown, no visible failure. What came instead was slower, far more unsettling, a quiet erosion, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but changes how weight is distributed inside you. He started noticing pauses where instinct used to be, spaces between thought and action that had never existed before, moments where he would normally assert control, redirect conversation, dominate the narrative, and instead he hesitated, not out of fear, out of awareness. And that awareness felt dangerous, because it wasn't something he could turn off. He tried to drown it out by doubling down on what had always worked. Sharper analysis, more preparation, more mental rehearsal. He revisited old frameworks, refined his language, polished his delivery. He told himself he was recalibrating, that this was just refinement. But something was different. The tools still functioned, but they no longer satisfied. Each successful manipulation left a faint aftertaste he couldn't ignore, a sense of distance from himself, as if he were watching his own performance from the outside, aware of every move before he made it, yet unable to feel present inside it. That detachment unnerved him more than failure ever had. He began to realize that his intelligence had always moved ahead of his body, ahead of his emotions, ahead of his lived experience. He could explain anything, deconstruct anything, outsmart anyone. But he couldn't sit with himself without reaching for strategy. And now, after encountering you, that gap was exposed. You didn't live ahead of yourself. You lived inside yourself, fully. And the difference between those two states was no longer theoretical. He could feel it, in his chest, in his breath, in the way his thoughts no longer felt anchored. At first, he told no one. This kind of disturbance doesn't get shared easily, especially by someone whose identity is built on mastery. He maintained the surface, the same composure, the same sharpness. But internally, questions kept rising without his permission. Not abstract questions, personal ones. Why was he always scanning for advantage? Why did stillness feel threatening? Why did he feel more alive observing you than winning against others? These questions didn't arrive as thoughts alone. They came with sensation, tightness, restlessness, a low-grade unease that followed him even when he was alone. He tried to analyze you as a variable, a rare case, an exception, something he could isolate and neutralize conceptually. But the more he thought about you, the clearer it became that you weren't doing anything special. You weren't deploying techniques. You weren't practicing restraint as a tactic. You weren't withholding engagement to gain leverage. You were simply not fragmented. That was the difference. You weren't split between who you were and who you were trying to be. And that unity made every interaction with you feel clean. No residue, no distortion, just contact. And contact, unfiltered, was something he had avoided his entire life without realizing it. He started noticing how often he used complexity to create distance, long explanations, layered reasoning, intellectual depth that impressed others but kept them safely away. Complexity had been his armor, not because he needed to protect himself from others, but because it kept him from feeling exposed. You didn't use complexity that way. When you spoke, your words matched your internal state. There was no gap, no performance layer, and that alignment did something unsettling. It made his own misalignment impossible to ignore. Sleep became inconsistent. His mind replayed interactions not to refine strategy, but to examine himself. He'd remember moments where he could have steered the exchange, asserted dominance, proven superiority, and chose not to. Not consciously. The impulse simply wasn't there anymore. That absence frightened him, because it suggested change was happening without his consent. He had always believed control was the highest form of power. And now, control felt like resistance, like holding on to something that wanted to move. He found himself watching people differently, not as pieces in a mental map, but as individuals. He noticed tension in their shoulders, hesitation in their speech, the way they adjusted when he spoke. Before, this awareness had fueled his effectiveness. Now it made him uncomfortable. He began to see the cost of his presence. How often he extracted clarity at the expense of ease. How often people left conversations with him sharper but smaller. And then he thought of you. How people seemed to expand around you without effort. How conversations opened instead of narrowed. That contrast haunted him. He tried to rationalize it again, told himself expansion was inefficient, that clarity required pressure, that comfort bred complacency. These arguments had always satisfied him before. Now they felt brittle. He could sense the fear underneath them, fear of losing relevance, fear of being ordinary, fear of not being needed. He realized how much of his identity depended on being the smartest person in the room, how much safety he derived from that position, and how fragile that safety actually was, because it required constant maintenance, constant proof, constant vigilance. You didn't seem to need any of that, and that difference felt like an accusation, even though you had never accused him of anything. The realization hit quietly one evening. He wasn't exhausted from working too much. He was exhausted from performing constantly, from monitoring himself, from anticipating reactions, from calculating outcomes. That mental load had been so familiar, he'd mistaken it for competence. But now, after encountering someone who carried no such load, The difference was undeniable. You moved through interactions without friction. He moved through them like a machine, under strain. And once you feel that contrast in your own body, you can't unknow it. He avoided you for a while, not out of resentment, but because being near you intensified the process. Your presence accelerated his internal questioning, and he wasn't ready to face where it might lead. He needed time to adjust, to stabilize, to convince himself he could integrate this disturbance without losing himself. But avoidance didn't stop the shift. It only slowed it. Your influence wasn't tied to proximity anymore. It had already entered his internal landscape. It surfaced in moments of choice, in the space before reaction, in the hesitation that now preceded assertion. He started revisiting his past, not nostalgically, but analytically. Childhood moments where intelligence had been rewarded while emotion was dismissed. Early experiences where being sharp meant being safe, where understanding replaced connection. He saw how early it had begun, how quickly he learned to stay ahead rather than stay present, how being admired for his mind became a substitute for being known as a person. These insights didn't arrive gently. They came with grief, with the realization that much of his life had been spent avoiding vulnerability, not because it was dangerous, but because it was unfamiliar. He finally sought you out again, not to challenge, not to analyze, simply to be in the same space. The interaction was brief, ordinary, on the surface. No deep conversation, no dramatic exchange, but internally, it landed with weight. He noticed how his body responded around you now. Less tension, less vigilance. He wasn't trying to read you. He wasn't scanning for advantage. He was just there. And that state felt unfamiliar, but relieving. Like setting down a bag he'd been carrying for so long, he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. He didn't tell you what was happening inside him. Not because he was hiding it, but because he didn't need to externalize it. This wasn't something to be processed verbally, yet it was happening at a deeper level. A recalibration of how he oriented himself to the world. He realized that your impact came not from what you said, but from what you didn't need. You didn't need to win. You didn't need to dominate. You didn't need to be right. You didn't need to be admired. And that absence of need created a kind of gravitational pull, not seductive, stabilizing. The people around him started noticing changes they couldn't name. He was still effective, still sharp, but less aggressive, less confrontational. He didn't seize control of conversations the way he used to. He allowed others to finish thoughts. He asked questions without hidden angles. Some interpreted this as restraint, others as fatigue. A few sensed something deeper, though they couldn't articulate it. They just felt different around him, less pressured, less measured. And that feedback loop reinforced the shift. He saw that reducing performance didn't reduce impact. It changed its quality. Privately, the internal dialogue intensified. If intelligence didn't have to dominate, what was it for? If control wasn't the goal, what replaced it? These questions didn't have immediate answers, and for the first time in his life, he allowed questions to exist without resolution. That was new, uncomfortable, but also liberating. He realized how much of his certainty had been a response to discomfort, a way to close loops quickly. To avoid sitting in ambiguity, you didn't rush closure. You allowed things to remain open. And in that openness, something reorganized naturally. He began to sense the deeper implication of what had happened between you. You hadn't challenged his worldview directly. You'd made it obsolete by not needing it. You didn't argue against his approach. You demonstrated another orientation so complete that argument became unnecessary. And that was the real disruption, not intellectual defeat. Existential displacement. The ground he'd been standing on was still there, but it no longer felt like home. And ahead of him, there was no clear path yet. Just space. Space he'd avoided his entire life. That space frightened him. But it also called to him. Because in that space, there was no role to maintain, no image to project, no hierarchy to navigate. Just presence, just being. He didn't know how to live there yet, but he could feel that staying where he was would now require effort. And once effort becomes resistance, change is no longer optional, it's only delayed. The process you'd initiated without intention continued unfolding, quietly, relentlessly. And as he stood on the edge of that internal threshold, sensing that his old identity could no longer carry him forward, one question began to surface with increasing clarity, demanding to be faced next. That question was simple, almost absurd in its clarity, and yet it carried the weight of a lifetime of misdirection. Who am I, if not the role I've built? He had built himself meticulously, like a fortress of habits, strategies, and projections. Every achievement, every conversation, every carefully calibrated reaction was a brick, a beam, a defense. That identity had protected him, elevated him, distinguished him. But now he could feel the mortar loosening, the beams creaking under the weight of presence he had never allowed himself to inhabit. For decades, he had moved through the world as a set of responses and premeditated actions. And suddenly, the scaffolding was optional and terrifyingly empty. He started noticing subtle ways his old armor interfered with living. The way he clenched his jaw automatically during conversations. The way his hands curled into fists when interrupted. The way his voice, so trained to command, carried tension even in neutral statements. He realized these were not signs of dominance or power. They were signs of a prisoner, someone performing readiness for a battle that existed only in anticipation. You had never performed. You hadn't needed to. And that lack of performance was contagious, a kind of invisible gravity pulling him toward a state of authenticity he couldn't yet name. For the first time, he saw his life in patterns he couldn't engineer around. Meetings, dinners, exchanges that had once felt like games, arenas, or tests now appeared as loops of repetition. The same faces, the same conversations, the same performances, repeated endlessly. And in the spaces between, he began to recognize a void. Not one he feared, but one he had always avoided. You had occupied that void effortlessly. You had allowed moments to exist without filling them with intent. You had moved through reality without manipulating it, and now he wanted to understand how that was possible. He started reading, not for strategy, not to find angles or tools for influence. He read philosophy, psychology, the science of emotion, the mechanics of human attachment, literature exploring the interior lives of others. Each page chipped away at the structures he had relied on. Each insight revealed that the mental games he had mastered were protective, not progressive. They were scaffolding built to avoid self-confrontation. They were rituals designed to preserve image and status, not understanding. And he recognized the cost, how much of himself he had forfeited in exchange for perceived mastery. Gradually, the world started to mirror his internal shift. Spaces where he had once felt tension and competition softened. Colleagues no longer braced in anticipation. Conversations no longer required mental sparring. The constant measurement of influence and reaction dissolved. And in that space, something extraordinary happened. He began to trust himself. not to manipulate or control outcomes, but to exist alongside them. Decisions became less about advantage and more about alignment. The difference was subtle, but profound. His old framework of dominance and strategy no longer guided him. Presence and observation did. And once that switch flipped, it was irreversible. The first confrontation with the truth came quietly. He reflected on the relationships he had built on performance, the friendships and alliances constructed on controlled impression. He realized many were shallow, transactional, or conditional. And yet he remembered the way people interacted around you, not out of obligation, fear, or reward, but freely. They were responsive to your presence, not defensive against it. That contrast hit him like a revelation. Influence without domination, connection without performance. And he understood viscerally that all the skill and training in the world had never achieved that. The more he observed, the more he recognized his own prior blindness. How often had he mistaken compliance for respect, submission for agreement, noise for engagement? All of it had been a house of cards, and you had no hand in knocking it down. You had simply refused to feed the structure. You had existed fully, and in doing so, you exposed the hollow mechanics of what he had always relied on. That exposure was quiet, almost imperceptible, but the impact was seismic internally. He felt a tremor that had no origin outside himself. One night, in the solitude of his apartment, he realized something terrifying. He had always feared losing control, but now he craved release. He wanted to see what it was like not to be strategizing at every moment. He wanted to explore what it meant to respond authentically, instead of calculating his moves. He wanted to inhabit his own presence fully, without the scaffolding of identity and role. And for the first time in decades, he understood the cost of pretending mastery while remaining fragmented. That realization carried grief, yes, but also a faint, tentative hope. The people who had sent him noticed the shift, not immediately, but eventually. They saw a subtle softening, a hesitation in the patterns they had come to expect. They accused, they pressed, they tried to provoke the old reflexes, and he found himself laughing, not outwardly, not visibly, but internally at the absurdity of their assumptions. They didn't understand that the transformation had nothing to do with them. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't resistance, it wasn't strategy. It was simply alignment. And alignment cannot be forced, manipulated, or reversed. It must be discovered, and once discovered, it cannot be unlearned. Then came the day he reached out, not with a plan, not with intent to manipulate or win. Just a text, just a question, a simple acknowledgement that he needed to speak to someone who had seen him not as a mechanism, not as a role, but as a person. And when you met, there was no performance on either side, no pretension, no strategy, no need to impress, only presence, only observation, only humanity. And in that quiet exchange, years of internal tension, fear, and misalignment began to unwind. He spoke, and for the first time, someone listened without judgment, without correction, without the silent measurement that had dominated his life. What poured out of him was raw, unedited, unstructured. Years of armor, of intellect turned into defense, of vigilance turned into vigilance without purpose. The words were heavy, but not burdensome to you. You received them without adding anything, without performing guidance. You held space, simply being present. And that presence allowed the fracture to become a realignment. Not a collapse, not a repair, but a birth. And when it ended, he realized he was no longer operating under compulsion. He had left the scaffolding behind. He was free to engage the world from himself, not the image he had built. Over the following weeks, he tested this new state. He stopped micromanaging interactions. He allowed uncertainty. He permitted vulnerability. He experimented with honesty, not as strategy, but as an expression of self. Each test succeeded in a way his old rules could never predict. Authority no longer required demonstration. Influence no longer required coercion. Power, in its truest form, existed simply as presence. And he began to understand that the apex predator they had sent to destroy you had been dismantled, not by skill, not by confrontation, not by manipulation, but by witnessing the freedom of someone unbound. The final step came quietly, almost imperceptibly. He returned to spaces he had dominated for years. Corporate mixers, boardrooms, social gatherings. The difference was subtle, but the energy was entirely new. People expected the same patterns, the same authority-driven maneuvers. He didn't perform, he didn't strategize, he simply existed. And the rooms responded differently. People didn't flinch, they didn't compete, they didn't adjust or scheme. They met him as a person, and in doing so, they reinforced what he had already begun to internalize. Identity built on authenticity carries far more force than identity built on performance. Eventually, he found you again in one of those rooms, and this time, the exchange was brief. Words were unnecessary. A glance, a recognition, a subtle nod. Gratitude filled the space. He had been sent to break you, but instead, he had been broken and rebuilt from the inside out. The weapon they crafted to dismantle had become the first human to step fully into himself because of your presence, your constancy, your refusal to engage in their games. That realization wasn't just humbling, it was revolutionary. You didn't change him, you didn't persuade him, you didn't teach or manipulate. You simply existed authentically, and that existence acted as a catalyst. And once someone experiences this, once they step into themselves without masks, the old frameworks of dominance, control, and manipulation crumble irreversibly. He would never return to his former state. He had witnessed another way of being, and that truth could not be unlearned. The apex predator, the mind breaker, the instrument of strategy, the carefully honed tool of influence. They had all been illusions, not because he failed, but because he finally confronted the only force that could reset him, the reality of living fully as himself. And that reality was unstoppable, contagious, liberating, and entirely irreversible. He had been sent to dismantle you, and instead, he became free. And in that freedom, he understood the most dangerous lesson of all. True power is never in the performance. True power is in the courage to exist fully, openly, and authentically. And once discovered, it can never be contained. And that is the final, irrevocable shift. He will no longer operate in their binary world of winners and losers, manipulators and prey. That world cannot contain him anymore. He has become aligned with something far greater, far quieter, far more dangerous than any mind-breaking tactics could ever produce. Presence, authenticity, and self-alignment. These are the forces that cannot be outmaneuvered, outwitted, or dismantled. They exist internally, silently, invisibly, yet they carry absolute authority. The weapon sent to destroy you now walks in the world as a liberated being. Not because someone handed him freedom, not because he was convinced, not because he learned a lesson, simply because he remembered himself. And that memory, once ignited, reshapes everything around him. Nothing will ever be the same for him, for the people around him, or for anyone who witnesses what happens when a mind breaker meets someone who cannot be broken. That is the quiet revolution. That is the uncontainable truth. That is the final reality he now inhabits, and there is no returning